Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you through some AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam questions, and these are going to be very similar to the types of questions you're going to see on the real exam. Now AWS have just updated the exam guide for the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner, so that means they've moved from the CLF-C01 version of the exam to the CLF-C02, and really what that means to you is that they've added in some new services and features that were not previously in the exam. So you need to make sure that you learn these various different services and features of AWS. Now, of course, we've added videos and lots of questions to our courses. So if you use our courses, you're going to be exposed to that information and have the right knowledge and be prepared for your exam. But what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to walk you through several questions. The aim is to help you to understand the types of topics that are going to come up, what sorts of things you need to know about these different services and features, and I'll give you some tips as well for what you might want to think about while you're going through your exam to give you the best chance of success. So let's get on with it. Okay, so here's our first question. A media company wants to find and subscribe to third-party data sources to enrich their existing data sets with new insights. Which AWS service would be the best fit for this requirement? And we've got 4 AWS services here. So I want to focus in on the keywords that I think are the most relevant for this question. So they are the piece where it says find and subscribe to third-party data sources. That's the one which is going to determine the service that we need here. Okay, so let's go through the answers. And what I'm going to do, even though I think I know what the answer is, I'm just going to eliminate the other answers. It's always good to look at those other distractors, as AWS call them, and make sure that I know that they're not correct. So let's start with Redshift at the bottom there. Redshift is a data warehouse. So it's good for loading data into it and then performing analytics on that data. But it's not good for finding and subscribing to third-party data sources. It doesn't do that. Neither does Glue, which is an extract, transform, and load service. So it's used for extracting data from somewhere like a database, transforming it into another format that might be required by the destination database or data warehouse, and then loading that data in. So it's not Glue either. What about Data Pipeline? Sounds a bit closer, but actually this is designed to facilitate the processing and transfer of data between different AWS services and on-premises data sources. It's not used for subscribing to third-party data sources. So just through that process of elimination, I'm left with one, and that is AWS Data Exchange, which is the correct answer. So Data Exchange allows customers of AWS to find, subscribe to, and use third-party data in the cloud. And we have a good lesson on this in our video-based training. So let's go on to the next question. This question says, a startup is developing a web application where users can find articles based on various criteria such as keywords, authors, or topics. They seek an AWS service that can handle this function efficiently. Which service should they use? So some of the Cloud Practitioner questions can have a little more of a scenario like this one. But really, the actual key requirements of the question are very simple. They've given you a specific use case and they're asking you which service would be the best one. So it's not too complex, it's just a bit more wordy than some other questions. So we need a service that allows us to find articles based on criteria such as keywords, authors, or topics. So it sounds to me like a search service. So straight away, of course, Amazon OpenSearch stands out as the obvious answer here. Now, quickly, again, I'll just go through the other ones. So we've got Simple Queue Service. That's a message bus. So it's for building decoupled applications where you can store information that's going to be processed by another component of the application, and which will then retrieve that data. Lambda is a serverless service. So it's a serverless compute service, nothing to do with finding articles based on criteria, such as keywords. And then lastly, EC2. Well, EC2 is just an instance, isn't it? It's a server operating system, usually running Windows or Linux. So you can put applications on it to do almost anything you want, but it's not in itself a search service. So Amazon OpenSearch here is the obvious answer. So let's move on to our next question. Here, AWS is asking you which AWS service provides a cloud-based integrated development environment, an IDE, that lets you write, run, and debug your code with just a browser without needing to install any software or configure services. So we're getting into the world of development here, and it's funny really because the Cloud Practitioner, even though it's the foundational level exam, does ask questions about this, and they do require you to understand some of these tools that are used by developers. You don't need to know too much. You certainly don't need to know how to write any code, but you do need to know what these services are used for. In fact, when you go onto the Solutions Architect Associate, you may notice that these are not covered at all. You actually don't have any questions on development tools. They're over in the Developer Associate. But here at this level, we do have some questions. They come down, as a lot of Cloud Practitioner questions do, to just understanding the core use cases and very basic features of specific services. All right, so we're looking for an IDE. We want to be able to write code in it, run our code, debug it using a browser, and we don't want to have to install anything. So clearly we want some kind of managed service here. So let's go through them from the top down. Let's start with CodeStar. So CodeStar enables you to quickly develop, build, and deploy applications on AWS. So it sounds similar, but it's not actually a cloud-based IDE. Next up, we've got Code Build. So this is a fully managed continuous integration service. So it's used for compiling code. So you're taking that source code and compiling it, running tests, and then producing software packages that can then be deployed by other services like Code Deploy. Then you've got Workspaces. So this is a managed, secure desktop as a service solution. So it's got nothing to do with development at all. So that leaves us with the one at the bottom here, Cloud9. So Cloud9 is the correct choice here because it is a cloud-based integrated development environment, and it does allow developers to write code, run their code, and debug their code using a browser. And it's a managed service, so there's nothing that you need to install yourself. Moving on to the next question here. Okay, so you can see straight away we have 5 answer choices here, and we need to select 2. So AWS will always let you know how many answers you need to select, and there's a few different combinations. So you've got 4 answers and 1's going to be correct, or you've got 5 answers and 2 are going to be need to be selected, and it can vary a bit beyond that, but AWS aren't very specific. These are the most common 2 formats you're going to see. Okay, so let's go through this question. Which AWS services facilitate building secure and scalable mobile and web applications offering features such as real-time updates and offline functionalities? A little bit tricky here because obviously that's a fairly complex use case. I think that, that's more into the realm of application development. However, as I said before, you do need to understand, which services to use for certain use cases. And really here, we're looking at mobile and web applications, and there's a couple of services on here which do stand out as being in that category. In fact, if you go into AWS Management Console, you'll find them in a category for web and mobile applications. Now, it's not Lambda because, as we mentioned before, Lambda is a serverless service for running compute, so it runs code using functions. Now, let's skip the couple in the middle there and go down to Code Deploy. So I talked about that one a bit before as well when I mentioned Code Build. So after you've packaged your applications using Code Build, you can deploy them using Code Deploy. So it's not about mobile and web applications specifically. API Gateway is, of course, used for building APIs like REST APIs and HTTP APIs and WebSocket APIs. But it's not specifically for creating scalable mobile and web applications with real-time updates and offline functionality. Okay, so it's a standalone service. Now, those other 2, AppSync and Amplify, these are the correct answers in this case. So what are these services? So AppSync enables the creation of flexible APIs, including options for real-time updates and offline functionality. Okay, so that's the difference between API Gateway, which does create APIs. It's not really got that sort of focus on mobile and web. It's really for any API that you need to create. And it doesn't have that real-time update and offline functionality. So here they are drilling into some details of the actual service itself, some of the functionality of the service. The other service there, Amplify. So Amplify is a set of tools and services that can be used to build scalable full-stack applications powered by AWS, also supporting real-time functionality and offline operations. So that's that question. It's a bit of a tricky one, I think, that one. But again, sometimes it just comes down to understanding the basics of the service and which category they fit into, and that will help you work out the use case. Next question, a small business owner who's not tech savvy is looking to find AWS certified experts for short-term projects. They need a service that can help them connect with professionals who can offer advice and help implement AWS solutions quickly. Which service should they use? A little bit wordy, this one. Really, again, it's a fairly straightforward question. They're just asking, how can this company find AWS certified experts for a project? Right, that's the call. Now, out of these options, is it going to be the AWS marketplace? Well, no, that's where you find things like appliances based on EC2 and that kind of thing. AWS support. Well, support are useful, but they're not going to jump in on your project. Okay, they're there purely to provide support services. Training and certification, well, you know about that one. You're involved in a training course, hopefully, to get your AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner certification. So training and certification is useful, but it's got nothing to do with a small business owner who wants to find an AWS expert for a project. So it is actually AWS IQ. Through AWS IQ, business owners can find, communicate with, and then hire AWS experts quickly and securely. It's a really good service, so you can even, once you've got some skills and some certifications, you can actually add yourself into AWS IQ, and you might be able to make a bit of money on the side. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Which AWS service supports an in-memory data structure compatible with Redis that delivers sub-millisecond latency for use cases such as caching, session stores, and real-time analytics? All right, so I think this one is a little bit tricky as well. So it's an in-memory data structure. Okay, so which of these databases, these are all database services. One of them is more strictly a data warehouse, but they're all essentially databases. And which one of these supports in-memory? You know, that's the one I'm going to focus on. Let's just push the other ones to the side for a minute. So one of them is actually called MemoryDB. Does that mean that the data is in memory? Maybe. What about DynamoDB? You might have heard of that service and that it provides very low latency. Now, DynamoDB with the DynamoDB Accelerator, DAX, does provide an in-memory data structure. So it actually has some in-memory caching for some of the items that are coming out of the table from DynamoDB itself. But DynamoDB without DAX is not in memory. Okay, so it doesn't mention DAX here, it's just DynamoDB, so it's not DynamoDB. RDS is the relational database service, uses EBS volumes, it's not in memory. Redshift is a data warehouse, so it's a type of database for analytics purposes. So MemoryDB stood out to me, okay, and it does actually have support for Redis. So the full name is Amazon MemoryDB for Redis, and it is an in-memory database service that's built on the Redis architecture. It does offer sub-millisecond latency, so it fulfills all the requirements of that question. All right, we've got a couple more. So let's move on. The next question is, a company is looking to develop a conversational chatbot that can interact dynamically with its customers through a natural language interface. Which service should be used to facilitate this? And what we've got here, we've got a few services that come from the machine learning and artificial intelligence category. And that's a very long list of services now. There's actually quite a few that have been added in recent times, and quite a few of them are subjects of the exam. Now, I would always recommend that you check the exam guide for the CLF-C02 before you go and take your exam. Even if you've been through our training courses or someone else's training courses, go through the exam guide. Look at the bottom where it says in-scope services and make sure that you know each of those services. So if there's something that you missed in your training, AWS are adding new services all the time, so that can happen. It's okay, just go and read up on that service, make sure you know the basics on what it is. And machine learning has certainly been a category where quite a few new services have been added in. So the question is, which one is good for a conversational chatbot? Okay. Now, a couple of them kind of tell you pretty well what they are. For example, I think transcribe, obviously that's a service for transcription. So it's about converting speech to text. Textract is about extracting text, just as the name tells you. So it's not either of those services. Then we've got comprehend. Now, that service is used to understand sentiment in language. Okay, so it's about comprehending and understanding what's going on in some language. So you're taking a body of text and you're trying to work out, using comprehend, what is the sentiment, what are customers thinking, what is their attitude towards perhaps your products or your company. So that's comprehend. So it's not any of those three, which leaves us with Lex. So Lex is a service that's designed to build conversational interfaces using voice and text. So that is the correct answer. All right, so we're on to the last question now. In the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, which perspective focuses on identifying capability gaps and helping your organization align its readiness for cloud adoption? So this is one where it's highly recommended that you read the white paper on the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework. You do have to understand some of the details of this framework. And this question just highlights that. So you need to understand the various different perspectives and what they are for. Okay, so let's just go from top to bottom. Let's start with envision. Okay, so this is not the correct answer because in this phase, organizations are focused on defining their vision and objectives for cloud adoption rather than identifying and addressing the capability gaps. What about align? Now, I believe align is the correct answer here because during the align phase of the cloud adoption framework, organizations will work to identify capability gaps and ensure their readiness for adopting cloud services. So that's exactly what we're looking for here. So let's just check, and yeah, that's the correct answer. Now, let's just check those other two, though. I just want to go through those so you understand those two different perspectives as well. So the reason that launch was incorrect is because this phase is more about initiating and launching new services or processes based on the strategies and plans devised in earlier phases. It's not primarily focused on identifying capability gaps. And then lastly, scale is incorrect because it involves scaling the implemented strategies and solutions to maximize the benefits of cloud adoption. Okay, so I've walked you through several Cloud Practitioner practice exam questions. I've got another video coming for you next week, so watch out for that one. And of course, we're adding many new questions into our practice exam course to cover lots of these new topics that are showing up in the exam. So make sure you're enrolled and you're going through the questions again to make sure you get those newest ones from us. And I wish you all the best in your exam.